Okay, so last week, as an extra video I put out, hopefully you've all seen it. If not, it's not too important right now. You need to go back and watch it, but it won't stop you from going. Anyway, the basic gist of the video is we took our pillow and we turned it into a sofa, and we uploaded this sofa into Second Life. So like I say, if you haven't seen the video, go back and watch it and try it, and then you can carry on. But it's not going to affect what we're going to be learning today anyway. But carrying on from this, let me just jump into Second Life here. You see, I've got two sofas here, and they look identical. Yeah, I know there's gaps, but I didn't spend much time on them. It was just for a tutorial. But they look pretty much identical. Some very subtle differences. But let's inspect these. Okay, if we look at this first one on the left here, the land impact is 3, and if we check the more info, this will take actually very quick today. I was about to say it's take a second to come up. These three top weights here, these weights are what we're really looking at when we're looking at land impact. Okay, so we've got download, physics and server. Land impact is always calculated on the highest of these three. Now the highest is 2.5, but when you're on a sim, you don't have fractional impact, so it's rounded up to 3. So land impact 3, and that is the download. Okay, and what this relates to, we'll learn more about this, but download basically relates to the geometry, physics obviously to the physics mesh, and server is more to do with kind of size and the actual server load. It gets a little more complex, but download and physics are two that you certainly should be looking at. So if we look at the next one, the one beside it, bearing in mind this one is 3, we've got a land impact of 1. And once again, if we look at our weights, we can see our download weight is reduced to 0.7. It's been rounded up. So what's the difference between these two? Like I say, they look virtually identical. Well, one clue might be is if we go into a wireframe view. Now, for wireframe, to view wireframe, you need your developer menu active. Now, this how you do this varies from viewer to viewer. But if we go into preferences, and certainly in Firestorm, if you type in developer, it will have show developer menu. If I untick that, the menu disappears from up here. But to view wireframe, you have to have developer menu activated. Okay, so to view wireframe is Control Shift R. Yep. And we can see a wireframe view of everything in our viewer. And now we can start to see the difference between these two sofas, and the difference really is the geometry. There's an awful lot of dense geometry here, whereas here the geometry is very sparse. So that's what I did. I took our 3 land impact sofa, I did a little bit more work into Blender, and turned it into 1 land impact. So Control Shift R is the same key to get back out of wireframe. Let's go back into Blender and talk about how we did this. Okay, so we have our sofa. Let's go into edit mode, and you can see the wireframe view again pretty much is the same as this edit mode. It's showing us all the faces, the vertices and edges. Okay, and it is pretty dense. And I want to reduce that. Now there's a couple of ways to reduce this. By far the simplest is, while you're in edit mode, is something called limited dissolve. Okay, now to find the limited dissolve, you press the X key, and this is your delete menu, and if you look down the bottom here, limited dissolve. Okay, you can see this has dissolved quite a bit. It's got a max angle of 5, and you can increase or decrease this to kind of change the view here, or the amount this is affected. So for example, if I come up further, you see the geometry is disappearing, but then so is the shape, until which point it will eventually just collapse. Can I get it to collapse? Yep, there we go. Alright, so default is 5. The other thing you will notice is that when you are using limited dissolve, you're not getting these nice quads anymore. You're getting these really awkward shaped faces, so we'll have to change that after. How to explain this max angle? Well, I think really I better come out of this, start a new layer here. Let me just get my 3D cursor into the middle with Shift C, and I'm going to add a plane. So Shift A, Mesh Plane. Let's just scale it down a little bit. And I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to select these two vertices and I'm going to extrude them slightly along the X. So E, X, bring them along. So what we have here is two faces. The angle difference between these two faces, because this is flat, is 0. Or in actual fact it's also 180. But let's just say it's 0. Okay. So with this edge selected, I'm just going to bring it down a bit, and you can quite clearly see we've got a difference or differentiation between the angles of these two faces. So if I was to select everything and I was to use my limited dissolve and I increase this angle, at one angle that middle edge will dissolve the two faces into one. And for this it seems to be around 16 degrees. Okay. Obviously if I go back and if I change this angle by moving this slightly less, shall we say, I'll select everything again and do the limited dissolve, and that seems to pop down about 8.5, 8.6, somewhere around there. Okay. So what it's saying is this angle here is once this angle here is greater than 8.6, this will dissolve into the next face. And we can kind of show this. You don't have to do this yourself. It's just me proving the point, if you like. So let me just go into edge mode, select these two faces, and I'm going to make a new face here, and I'm going to show the face angles. Okay, this is showing 172.5. Now 180 less 170, oh, 71.5 is about 8.5 degrees. So let me just delete this again. Delete that edge and select everything again. Do a limited dissolve. 8.4, 8.5, yeah. So that is what limited dissolve does. It looks at the difference between the angles of two faces in relation to one another, and if it's less than a certain point, it won't dissolve it, and if it's higher, it will. I hope that all makes sense. Alright, let me just get rid of this, and we'll go back to our layer 1. We'll select our sofa again. I'm going to edit mode, and once again we're going to limited dissolve. But what's happened here is because I've done it a couple of times, I can't go back, but it's got a messed up UV. So let me just reopen that file again. Open recent sofa. There we go. And if I go back into edit mode, yeah, the UVs are the way they were. Right, so limited dissolve again. So let's try this, limited dissolve, and I've got a 5-degree angle there. It's all looking fairly kind of good. We got our curves and bumps, not as many as there were because we've reduced the geometry. But it's all looking good, but it's really messed up this UV. However, if we delimit it on UVs, it will keep the original UV islands, the original seams, and you can see the seams are still here marked in red. So this will be important if you've already unwrapped, is to delimit by UVs. Okay, so that's at an angle of 5. Let me kind of see if I can make it much better. Not really. 5, the standard seems to be good for this. You will notice, and we'll see this more in mode, there is a slight kind of deterioration in the texture quality. But nonetheless, you know, it is better. We could work with that. We could kind of get around that by well, let's select everything and let's deselect these 3 edge loops. So I'm using Shift Alt right click to deselect them. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, my limited dissolve is going to work on everything selected. Anything unselected it won't touch. So let's try that again. Limited dissolve, and once again it's 5 degrees, but I've left these edge loops and the texture hasn't changed. Okay, it's quite normal. If I flick back into SL and we look at the difference, we can see a difference. But this one, I didn't do that with the edge there, so the texture did change between this and this. But anyway, for the purposes of this, let's go ahead with this deselected texture one. Deselected texture. This one where the texture hasn't been affected. Okay, so we've got our geometry here. The next thing we need to do is select everything, and we need to tidy this geometry up into quads or triangles again. So with everything selected, I'm going to use my mesh menu and the face menu, which is Control F. Faces menu, Control F, and I'm going to triangulate faces, which is Control T. Now what you'll see has happened is every face has been resolved down to a triangle. We could turn some of these triangles back into quads. Control F and tries to quads, but it's not going to benefit us any, because once it comes to SL it's all going to be triangles anyway. So let me just Control Z backwards. So I've got this simplified geometry. I've got my UV unwrap, I've got my texture already baked. I should be able just to export this now and get a better result. So, File, Export Collada Default. I'm going to change this preset to SL Static, so it pre-selects what I need. And I've already got a couple of sofas here, Sofa Light and the sofa, let's call this Sofa Light one. So I'll select the Sofa Light, you see this becomes Sofa Light. If I want to append it with a number, I can just press the plus button here. Becomes Sofa Light 1. And I'm going to export that collada. Make sure it's going to my desktop, everything else is okay. Export collada. Right, let's come back into SL and try and upload again. Right, so I'll go to my build menu, upload, mesh model. I'm looking at my Sofa Light 1, which is there. You'll see it's come in, and if you look closely you can see a little bit of where it has simplified the geometry, but we've already got a baked texture on the higher poly model, and this will hide this. But anyway, so I'm going to go through the usual steps. I'm going to reduce my lowest lot to 0. I'm going to come across to the physics. I'm going to choose my sofa physics file, which is there. And you can see that it's coming in at an angle. That immediately tells me something's wrong. And I already know what's wrong. It's because if I go back to my Blender file, I will bet you that the scale and rotation hasn't been reset. And there it is. See, rotation -11, scale is slightly off. So I'm going to Control A, apply rotation and scale, and export it again. File, export. Collada, it's kept the same defaults. I'm going to export it as Sofa Light 1, and export Collada, and come back into Second Life. Let me close this out and do this again. Build, upload, mesh model, Sofa Light 1, reduce this to 0, go to my physics tab, upload my physics mesh, which is Sofa Phys, and now you can see it's lined up the way I wanted it to. Okay, so I'm going to press analyze on that, just so Second Life works out where all the holes should be. Upload options, the size is probably a bit off, we'll worry about that in world. I'm going to change the name of this to Sofa Light 1, so I can find it in my inventory. Turn my caps lock off. Calculate these, and we can see we've got land impact of 0.6, download 0.5, physics of 0.6. So it's going to take the highest of these figures. Now these two are the same, so it will take the 0.6. It will make it 1 prim because it will round it up, but we're going from a 3 prim to 1 prim. So let me just upload this. It takes a minute for it to do this. Here's my SofaLight1 file. Okay, it is a good bit smaller. So let me resize it. I'm just going to do this roughly. I'm just going to plonk this over in the corner here. And I'm just going to stretch it using these bars. It's the same size, thereabouts. Yep, close enough for me. Okay, we see the line impact is still 1. We can check this. It's probably gone up from 0.6 a little higher. It's gone at 1.2, but in this case, Second Life is rounded down to 1 prim, or to 1 land impact, which is perfect. So just to finish this off, let's change the colour to white. Let's change the texture. We've already got this texture, so I'll use the eyedropper tool just to pick it up off there. And there is our 1 land impact or 1 Li sofa.